I can confidently say that I have been put in situations that are way past my depth of what I can handle of, and only the grace of God has carried me through. And I'm still discovering more and more what it looks like to rely on God for strength. There is no one who's going to be more trustworthy than God. If he is perfect, if he's perfect in wisdom, if he's perfect in power, if he's perfect in love, that is the strongest possible basis on which to trust him.
Episode 3, we have one of my favorite high school teachers on board with me, Mr. Utomo. We met in eighth grade, and we've kept our friendship ever since. And I'm grateful to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Justin. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, this is just exciting getting to chat for a bit.
Yeah. So I think the world really deserves to hear your story, and I'd like to kind of get into that. Because recently you and your wife you published a book. So could you kind of,
Yeah,
if you don't mind, kind of go into that story of how that book came about and
for
just
sure.
what's the origin story?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
It's exciting to have this opportunity to talk about this with you. So,
Yeah.
yeah, as far as the book that my wife and I wrote, she mostly wrote it, and I'm the co-author on it, and I actually have a copy of it here. So let me pull it up real
Whoa,
quick.
let's go.
There's my lovely wife, Grace, and if you look really closely, you can see my name really small underneath her name on the cover. So that's really funny to me that um, I'm literally the small print there. But the story behind this book is that well, she and I, my wife Grace, we met in college actually. So we went to California Baptist University, which is a Christian college in Riverside in SoCal, Southern California. And I was a junior in my undergrad, and she was coming in as a transfer sophomore. And I was studying piano performance at that time. That was my major. And there was a group at our school, and it was called the University Choir and Orchestra, UCO. This was a group that rehearsed twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I think it was 2 to 4:30, and we performed as well, choir and orchestra at a lot of the churches in the area. And she came in as a violinist from the Eastman School of Music. So to me, that was really surprising when our director announced that day that we had a new student coming in from Eastman, and I was like, wow, why would someone transfer from Eastman to a school that's not Eastman to study music? Because it's really competitive to try to get into a school like Eastman. But I quickly learned that, for my wife Grace, as she kind of talked about why she left, and that's kind of its own story in its own way.
Yeah.
She realized that while she was there, the messages that she was getting from her professors was basically you have to put music above everything else. And that even meant relationships, that even they could even included character or things like that. They literally expected their students to pursue music above all else. And I think for my wife Grace, she realized that, wow, this is not the kind of environment that's encouraging me to be selfless, to put others above myself. And so she realized that for herself, it was best for her to actually relocate to a different environment. And that's how we found ourselves at the same school.
Mhm.
But from that point on, I was and I still am a pretty quiet person. I'm pretty shy. I'm very content, kind of, doing my own thing. But for whatever reason, I felt inspired to introduce myself to my wife when she transferred, and we struck up a friendship. And we discovered that in addition to music, we shared a lot of the same interests, actually. We both love to read, we love literature, we love philosophy, history, languages, culture. So we got to talk about a lot of the same things. And actually she had never dated before and I had never dated before. So when we started
Yeah.
dating, we were actually each other's first boyfriend and girlfriend. And so we dated for about a year and a half, and then we were engaged for about 6 months, and we got married in December 2015. I was 23 and she was 22. So relatively young, so to speak, getting married at that
Yeah.
age, but we both um, we were committed to starting a marriage together, and we were committed to each other. And we were very, very thankful, and we counted it a huge blessing that we were able to get married. Um, Fast forward then about 11 months, so right before our first anniversary, and at that time, now I was in my master's program, still at the same school, studying piano performance and music composition. And my wife at that time, she'd finished her undergrad. When she transferred to CBU, California Baptist
Hmm.
University, she majored in healthcare administration. So she'd finished that undergrad degree, and she was now working at the physician assistant department, and as the secretary there. And um, but she was still active as a musician. To make a living as a musician, we were both teaching private
Hmm.
lessons. We were both playing for weddings and different things like that.
Yeah.
And so now this is December 2016. I was playing piano for a choir at a school nearby in Corona, California, and I was finishing up a concert there. And my wife later that night had a Christmas concert in Orange, California. So the plan was for me to finish my concert, swing by our apartment, pick her up, and then take her to her concert. Well, when I got back to our apartment to pick her up, she wasn't there. And so I was wondering where she was, where she could be. And then I thought maybe she's gone ahead to grab some food. I think the plan was for me to pick her up, grab some food, then we go. And I was like, okay, maybe she just walked to, there was like a Subway sandwich place nearby. And so I went there, but she wasn't there either. So I called her several times, still nothing. And I'm going to fast forward through a lot of details that are in the book. But what had happened was she had been in a car accident. And yeah, she had been trying to get to that Subway restaurant, and she was walking in a crosswalk. Her crosswalk light said green. It was green, so she went. And then a driver had ran a red light and hit her in the crosswalk, going about 40 miles an hour.
Mm.
And we only know this after the fact because there was a camera at that traffic intersection. And so there was some footage of the accident that the police department was able to review afterwards. I've actually seen it as well, the recording. Um, but this was a bad accident, as you can imagine, since she
Yeah.
was a pedestrian, and this car was going about 40 miles an hour. She nearly died that night. She had two strokes. She had a traumatic brain injury. Um, she broke both of her knees and had a skull fracture, several other injuries. And so basically that one event was a giant turning point in her life and in my life, um, because everything afterwards has been colored by that event in terms of that first year, right afterwards, basically 2017 onwards, was filled with medical appointment after medical appointment. It felt like we were living in hospitals, so to speak. We saw many different specialists for many different things, just rehab, therapy. She had to relearn how to walk again, which is part of why we named her book, or why she named it Walking with Grace.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so I think that one event has taught us a whole lot about life, about marriage. It's taught me personally a whole lot about what it means to be a husband and to care for my wife. And um, one of the saddest results of this accident for us has been that she can no longer play violin. because of the strokes. She has no sensation in her left hand, which you need to have if you're going to play violin.
Yeah.
And so losing that for her has been a tremendous loss. But even since then, um, she did survive. God did spare her life, and now, having lost kind of her identity as a musician, she's found kind of a new identity as a writer. And the fact that her book has been published at this point is a huge testament to just how hard she's worked to recover, just her determination, her perseverance, and just the creativity that she has. She's still the same on the inside, and so all that creativity and expression that she channeled through her violin previously, writing is now her medium for that, and I'm just extremely proud of her. It makes me happy every time I look at a copy of this
Yeah.
book. So that's kind of a description of what that's been like for us.
Man, like I think your every time I hear your story, it just touches a nerve in my heart and I can just feel it so deeply. And, you know, going through such a life event, I feel like you gain, a tremendous amount of wisdom,
Mm,
both with you and your wife. And, you know, there's a lot to unpack here, but I wanted to ask, in the midst of the darkness, like given that big unexpected turning point in both of your lives, how are you able to find that light again and kind of rekindle that joy in life that you both had?
yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking, Justin.
Yeah.
And I think the 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 honest and best answer I can give is that um, God has carried us through this,
Hmm.
because the scale of the challenges that come with something like this are immense, and there I can confidently say that I have been put in situations that are way past my depth of what I can handle, of what feels manageable to me. Um, and only the grace of God has carried me through and carried her through as well. And maybe we can ask, well, what does that look like on a daily level, more concretely?
Hmm.
I think what it looked like, especially in that first year of intensive recovery, is it felt like every day when I woke up, there was just so much that needed to be done, from like wound care to medication to I was still working, I was finishing up school, I had several part-time jobs, to therapy appointments. The whole day was full of things to do, and I literally got up and I did the first thing, did the second thing, and just kind of moved throughout the day. And before you knew it, it was nighttime, time to sleep. You
Yeah.
hope you get a restful night, and you wake up and you take care of the next day and all the needs that it has. Um, and looking back on it, I still wonder today, how did I do that? And
Yeah.
that's where I come to the conclusion of this was where God was giving me the strength to do that, because I certainly ran out of my own strength to do that, and and now, looking back, this upcoming December will be 8 years since her accident, which seems
Yeah.
like a pretty long length of time now. And we are out of the intensive part of her recovery, and now we're kind of in the long-term phase of where it feels like a marathon, basically, of she has recovered a whole lot. She still has limitations, where her life now still doesn't look like what it looked like before her
Hmm.
accident. Um, but I'm still discovering more and more what it looks like to rely on God for strength. Even today, as we're talking, just the normal everyday pressures of life, like it's a lot sometimes with
Yeah.
whether you're a student in school, or for me as a teacher working, and I'm also in the middle of my own doctorate program, so I'm still a student in that sense
Yeah.
too. And even just continuing to help Grace at home, with chores and different responsibilities. Life gets pretty busy sometimes, and
Yeah.
even for me, when I feel tired, a lot of the time. That just reminds me of how limited I am and how crucial it is that I rely on someone bigger than me, someone who has a lot more energy than I do, who has, in fact, unlimited energy. And that has made the difference in terms of making it through a challenge of this nature.
Yeah, that's great. It's like kind of going, just living life day by day and just
Hmm.
seeing where it leads us ultimately down the line. Yeah, and I wanted
Hmm.
to ask, like, if you were to, speak a message of advice to yourself, 8 years ago,
Mm.
what would be something you'll tell your younger self?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. If I could tell myself something 8 years ago, I think it would be to remind myself to trust in the Lord completely. I think trust is hard, even at on a horizontal level between
Mhm.
people, right?
Right.
Person to person,
Yeah.
and also we can think about how a person might, trust God as well. But um, when you're trying to think through, like, how do I trust someone? You want them to be trustworthy, right? You want to trust
Yeah.
someone who is going to be dependable, who's going to be reliable, that you can take them at their word, who you can count on to be there for you. And it is a true blessing when you can find someone like that in your life, whether
Mhm.
it's a family member or a friend or a colleague or a teacher or whoever it is. When you find people like that in your life, really let them know how much you value them because it
Yeah.
can be kind of rare to find people like that.
Mhm.
I'm very glad to say that I found someone like that in my wife. I trust her completely, and I know that she's always going to have my best interests in mind. And I'm extremely grateful to be able to call her my wife, and that we can go through life together. But in terms of what I would tell my younger self, is that there is no one who's going to be more trustworthy than God because of who he is. And if he is perfect, if he's perfect in wisdom, if he's perfect in power, if he's perfect in love, that is the strongest possible basis on which to trust him. Um, and I think, yeah, I would just want to let my younger self know that it's okay to be put in situations that where you're in beyond your ability, where you're in beyond your depth, because there is a God who cares for you and who will bring you through it. And you can place your complete trust in him.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I mean, when I've met you as a teacher, you've been a man of of faith towards God, and I really
Mm,
respect and admire that. And I wanted to ask, were you always in Christianity, or was there kind of a switch in your life where you kind of went from not believing in God to, oh, I'm going to put my trust in God? Was there like a moment in time?
yeah. Yeah, thanks for asking. So I think for
Yeah.
me, my dad is a pastor actually. So
Oh, okay.
I did grow up in a Christian
Yeah.
household. My mom is a Christian as well, and from as early as I can remember, I did grow up going to Sunday school. I did grow up going to church, and learning stories from the Bible, and most importantly, learning what the gospel is. And the gospel, in a nutshell, is the central message of the Bible, which is this: that God created a perfect world in which we can have a perfect relationship with Him. And when I say perfect, literally perfect, no natural disasters, no sickness, complete trust, complete openness, complete faith, um, and then the fall happens. And what we mean by the fall here is Adam and Eve, the very first people who ever lived. They decided to turn away from God. They disobeyed Him. They basically broke their relationship with Him, and then there was this divide between us as humans and God. But the good news is that because God loves us and cares for us so much, He didn't leave us in that state. And He created a way for us to be restored to Him, to restore the relationship that we had with Him. How? By paying the debt that we owed Him, actually. And that debt is a debt of sin. And God is, because he's God, he deserves complete worship and obedience. And when we turn away from him, that's a debt that we owe him, actually. But Jesus, the Son of God, died on the cross to pay the price for our debts, canceling that debt for us, and thereby making it possible for us then to be restored to God and to have a relationship with him again. And in about a minute or so, that is a very brief description of
Yeah.
the good news that
Mhm.
we call the gospel, right?
Yeah.
Which is how it's possible for me, for example, or for you, for anyone really, to turn to God and say, Lord, please forgive me of my sins. Like I want to know you. Um, and so I I I count myself very, very blessed to have heard about this from an early age. And I became a Christian as a child. I was 6 years old. And my mom prayed with me. She asked me if I understood what the gospel was, and I said yes. And I asked Jesus to be my Lord. Now, even though 6 is a pretty young age, I do feel like even at
Yeah.
that age, I understood what the gospel was.
Mhm.
And from that point on, it was a journey of continuing to learn more about who God is
Mm.
and how He cares for us on a daily basis of learning to trust in Him. But I think we can kind of think through age 6 to 22, then looking back, 22, 23 being when the accident happened. I honestly look back at that long stretch of time in my own life as the time where God was preparing me for what was coming up in terms of this big challenge that He allowed to happen in my wife's life and in my life,
Mhm.
so that when the time of the accident did come, um, I feel like he had prepared me to have a foundation of faith so that I was able to trust him. Um, because I knew who he was, because I had spent that time with him growing up, and just going through life with him. So I guess to respond to your question here, um, the actual moment of placing my faith in Christ came for me when I was young as a 6 year old. Um,
Mhm.
but the true test of that faith, of
Yeah.
that trust in the Lord, I feel like that really took place in my life at the time of the accident, which
Mm.
happened about 20 years later or so, a little under 20 years. Um, but even though, we can't predict our lives, we don't know what's coming up
Right.
in our
Right.
own
Yeah.
futures. So I had no idea something like this was coming my way in terms of, my wife's accident and all that. But God is outside of time, and so none of this was a surprise to him, right? That's something that I think about a lot too, is how we are so time bound. We live in the present. We can try to look ahead into our futures and plan and as
Right.
best as we can, but we really don't know. None of us knows what tomorrow holds. But I'm like, how different it is from God's perspective to be eternal and to be outside of time, and like he literally knows what tomorrow holds and the day after and the day after that. It's so different from our experience being within time. um, all this to say that I'm grateful that he prepared me throughout my life,
Yeah.
introducing me to the truths of the Bible as a child, so that as a young adult, I had that foundation when the storms of life came.
Yeah. Because I'm interested in like seeing which people are the happiest, and it seems like that people who just surrender their, you know, whatever future plans that they might hold to a
Mm,
higher power, to God. I feel like those people are the most at peace with themselves because they know that someone's got their back and whatever lies in the future, it's all meant to be. So I think a lot of people are like when they tap into that, they really find peace and contentment. So do you relate with that?
yeah, that's an interesting observation that you just shared. I think when it comes down to it, the biggest questions are questions of life and death, right?
Mm,
As in, and what I mean by that is maybe sometimes, like, our attention gets occupied by so many different things these days.
Yeah.
social media, work, leisure, entertainment, creative pursuits, so many different things. And they're not necessarily bad things, right? But it's just that
Mhm.
sometimes when I think about what my attention tends to be attracted by, if I pause for a second, a lot of the time these things, um, when I look back on it later, I'm like, is it really worth all the time that I spent playing chess on my phone or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we spend so much of our time and energy pursuing so many different things. But the things that really matter are the things that are the big questions, right? The questions about life and death, about what's the purpose of my life? Why am I here? Where did I come
Yeah.
from? Where am I going? What's ahead for me? And I think when, as a Christian, for me, um, the the foundation for having peace is, I think, what you said. I know how limited I am in terms of my knowledge of the future, my abilities, or whatever else. And it's like when you run into challenges that are way bigger than you are, if you're the only resource you have, that can feel pretty daunting sometimes.
Yeah.
If the only compass you have to go by is your own knowledge or your own intuition, that can feel pretty limited at times.
Mhm.
Um, but if you have this faith, this belief that you know what, like this life isn't random, my life isn't random. There is a God that created me, who knows me better than I know myself, and He is in charge of everything. That's a completely different perspective,
Yeah.
and that makes the future. And yes, it's unknowable from my perspective, but it's not unknowable from God's perspective. And if you are on God's side, if He is for you, um, then you have that reassurance that even though you don't know everything, He does, and He's got your best interests in mind. And I think that that change in perspective is what allows me then to have trust. Now, I do want to say too that as I'm sharing this with you, this doesn't mean that I have complete tranquility all the time, you know. And so I
Yeah.
think it's often the case that I mean I would actually say I deal with anxiety most of the time. I still worry about a lot of different things. I worry about whether for the longest time, I was actually worrying about the next downturn for my wife's health because she's
Mhm.
had so many ups and downs throughout the years
Yeah.
where, you know, she may be doing really bad and then she gets better and then something unexpected happens and she gets
Mhm.
worse again. And for the longest time, I was always, even when she was doing well, thinking and worrying about when's her next downturn going to be, and just being hyper vigilant all the time and just I think, like what we're talking about just now, the uncertainty and unpredictability of the future, that can cause tremendous anxiety, just not knowing what's coming up.
Mhm.
And so when I talk about trust and faith in God, for me, it's a process. It's not like I've checked the box once and,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, everything's great, you know, no matter what happens. It's more of a daily, sometimes hour by hour, minute by minute process of reminding myself of the truths and the principles that are strong enough for me to build my life on.
Mhm. Got it. I love the wisdom that you just brought up here. Yeah, how can someone focus more on God?
Yeah, I was thinking about that recently too, and it's
Oh,
like
listen. Yeah.
thinking about God and talking about God is interesting because I'm trying to role play as far as thinking about God from the perspective of someone who maybe doesn't believe in God or maybe is wondering, is God
Right.
there?
Right.
And maybe okay, think about prayer, for example, as a Christian. I pray on a regular basis, and prayer is basically talking to God, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, if I take a step back and try to role play, maybe someone who is new to praying or has never prayed before, maybe it just seems like you're talking to the walls, right? You're talking to an empty
Yeah, yeah.
room or you're talking to the air. It's like who's listening to what you're saying, right? And I think what it comes down to is we live in this physical universe, right? We live in this material universe. I'm here in a room with lots of books behind me, as you can see. I'm
Yeah.
at school, and this is one of the rooms in the library. And so we live in this material universe where there's a table that my laptop is on. I can touch my laptop, I can
Hmm.
see my hands, and even digitally, I can see you on the screen right now. But I know you're sitting in some room somewhere too, and that if we were in the same location, we can have this conversation face to face. I
Yeah.
think so much of our waking experience is so physical
Hmm.
that it can make it very difficult to think of a non-physical person,
Right.
right? Which is God. God is spirit, right? And so we can't see him the same way that we can see other people, right? And so maybe in that sense, like, yeah, I can see how it might be weird to think about having a relationship with someone who's invisible, someone who is not sitting across the table from you that you can converse with. Um, but I think the Bible acknowledges this too, actually, in John, the book of John, I think it's chapter 3, where
Hmm.
Jesus is actually talking with a guy named Nicodemus, right? And this is actually in that same conversation where John 3:16 comes in, a verse that
Hmm.
a lot of people know. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Um, Jesus uses the metaphor of the wind actually as something that we can't see, and yet we are able to, by looking at the effects of it and tracking it in other ways. It would be foolish to say it doesn't exist, right? Or even
Hmm.
just you and me talking now, something like gravity or something like quantum mechanics or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
All these things that are not necessarily visible the way that my AirPod case is visible, but um, we can kind of track different properties of them, different effects, and things that ways that things interact with other things, and say, okay, based on these things, we know that this exists and it functions in this way. But even then, if we carry this conversation further, we're still kind of talking about things within the material universe, right?
Yeah.
Forces and energies
Hmm.
within the physical universe. When we're talking about spiritual realities, we're talking about realities that transcend all this. The
Yeah.
Bible says that God is omnipresent. He can be everywhere at once. I can't be everywhere at once, right? So it's like, how does this work? So we're talking about realities that it's of a different kind. It's these are different qualities of being than what you and I experience. But I think all this to say, I'm kind of rambling. My thoughts are kind of going
No,
everywhere right
it's
now. But
great. Yeah. Hmm.
um, so I guess all this to say, if God is a on a higher plane of existence than we are, then it would make sense that our understanding of him is going to be more limited than he actually is,
Right.
if that makes sense, right? It's like, and then to use an analogy, and I realize all analogies have limits. It's like I can look at a goldfish in a bowl, right? Like I'm aware that the goldfish exists. Maybe the goldfish is aware that I exist in to
Hmm.
some capacity, but the goldfish is never going to be able to comprehend me in the same way that, for example, like you and I can talk, right? And we can kind of comprehend each other
Right.
as people. Um, but even that comparison between the me and the gulf between us and God qualitatively is bigger than the gulf between me and a goldfish, the difference between me and a goldfish, right? Because even me and the goldfish, we're still physical. We're both physical creatures and physical beings. We're still in that same category of being. When we're talking about God, he's so much vaster than we are. Can you imagine what it actually means to have unlimited power? Like,
Yeah.
what does that
It's
even mean, right? I
yeah.
mean, it blows our minds to think about stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
Um, but bringing this back to, I think, where this question started from, in terms of um, thinking about God and thinking about the questions that matter. Um, this is going to sound weird, but I actually think about like mortality a lot. That's something that I
Mm.
think about a lot is life and death, as
Yeah,
in, and I think part of why I think about it is one, I think it's just fascinating, just this idea of, and I think everyone at some point has asked the question like, after I die, then what? What happens, right? But I think also with my wife's accident and how close she came to dying that first night, um, her life, whether she died or survived, was entirely beyond my control. There was
right,
nothing that I could do to medically kind of like sway the balance one way or another. Um, and even that too, I prayed that God would give her more time on earth, and he did, right? But seeing her come that close to dying has made this idea or this concept of death not just something conceptual or theoretical for me, but it's a very real thing, right?
right.
And I want to talk about this in a respectful and sensitive way because um, I don't know who may be listening to this in the future, but if you're listening to this and maybe you've had your own encounters or interactions with maybe losing a friend or a family member or just having a brush with death in some way, um, it's a serious thing. It's a big
Yeah,
deal, and we know that one day I'm it'll be my time, right? And this is true of all of us.
yeah,
And where I'm going with this is when you realize, you being in general, right? When we all realize that our time on this earth is limited, it's finite, um, it should impact the way that we live then on a daily basis, right?
yeah,
It would be one thing if we had unlimited time to do literally whatever we wanted. Okay, great. Play video games for 25 hours a day, right?
yeah,
And so on and so forth. But it's like, no, we actually don't have unlimited time. And
yeah,
then when you think about eternity, like what eternity is like, that also blows my mind a bit too, because
yeah,
like I can't even comprehend what eternity actually looks like, what that means. But think about this. Some people live to be 80 years old, you know, they live into their 80s. They live a long, full life. Some people live into their 60s, and then others, 40s, 20s, so on and so forth. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had 35 years, right,
yeah,
of life before he died, and so none of us like I'm 31 now. So actually, if I was Mozart, I would have 4 more years,
yeah,
and that's kind of crazy to think about too, right? But we don't know. We don't know the time that God has given to us. But something I've thought about is this: no matter how long or short our earthly life is, whether it's 20 years, 40, 60, 80, all of it compared to eternity is the blink of an eye, essentially,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Because it's still finite compared to infinite, right? Thinking about things like this, at least for me, it's caused me to really reflect on what matters, right? And I think that's where tying this all back to the life experiences that God has allowed my wife and I to have in terms of her accident. And I mean, she's gone through so much pain in terms of just physical pain with recovery, and she's had seizures and so many other challenges that she's had to face. Um, when I think about all that she's had to go through and what we've gone through together as a couple, when I trust that God has something better for us on the other side, that also helps me to keep going in
mm,
terms of no matter how bad it gets for now, even if for some people they struggle their entire lives. I think of someone like Johnny Erickson Tata, for example, right, who she became paralyzed when she was a young woman, and she's been a quadriplegic her whole entire life up until the present. And I think she's in her 60s or maybe 70s now. I'm not sure exactly her age, but her whole life she suffered. And she's lost out on so much. And yet I am so inspired by her and so encouraged by her example of trusting in the Lord because of who who he is. And she believes that based on who God is and what he has promised for me on the other side of this life, that has allowed her to keep going throughout her life. And in turn, that's allowed her to become a source of inspiration and encouragement for people like me. I can look at her life and draw encouragement from that. And I'm hoping that this is a lot of our story that we share in my wife's book. Um, I'm really hoping that whoever reads this book can be encouraged that no matter what they may be facing in this life, and this is not to minimize whatever anyone might be going through. In fact, it's probably good to acknowledge, and when we're going through very serious and very difficult things, um, yeah, these things are really heavy and really serious sometimes, and sometimes we might feel like we're wandering in the dark, right? Wondering where do I go from here? What's ahead in store for me? Um, yeah, just realize that this is temporary, and that
Mhm.
there is an eternity of perfect joy and peace with your creator, who cares about you and made you intentionally. That can be literally a life-changing perspective to adopt.
Yeah, man, that's beautifully said. Like really like appreciate your insight and thoughts about this whole quite, maybe theoretical and spiritual topic. And I guess going on like the whole idea of like mortality, because I guess God has given us a purpose on this earth because otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? So,
Mm,
and he has given us gifts and talents within us that we may not have discovered or come to realize yet. And sometimes when we do realize that we have, a calling or a mission or, purpose from God, we sometimes might ignore it and chase some other, worldly desire, such as like money, fame, power, status. And I was wondering, how can someone tap into their calling more? And how can someone have, more of that courage to live out what God has planned out for them?
yeah, great question. Thanks, Justin. Um,
Yeah,
I think what comes to mind for me thinking about that is okay, so to kind of paraphrase what you just asked, right? God has given us a purpose in this life, and He's given us certain gifts, certain
yeah,
abilities, certain passions, um, and we can pursue those things that He's given us, or we can pursue other things,
yeah.
like fame, money, whatever it is, right? And like, how can we navigate that? Well,
Hmm.
I think at the end of the day, we as humans, we want to be happy, right? We want to be content. We want to be fulfilled.
Right,
We
right.
want to be satisfied. And it's not wrong to want those things. It's not wrong to want satisfaction or to want
Yeah,
joy or to want happiness. And when we pursue something, it's because we believe that that thing will provide happiness, right? Will provide
hmm,
satisfaction. Um, oh, if I have more money, then I'll be happier, right?
yeah.
Or oh, if I was famous, then I would be happy because people would know who I was. I would be recognized and appreciated, so on and so forth. Um, it's just that I think what people may find is when you pursue the wrong thing, it may not give you what you were hoping that it would,
Mhm.
right? In terms of money, for example, well, how much money is enough, right? It's like at what
Yeah,
point, if you're
right.
pursuing career or whatever it is, and I found this to be true in my own life too. It's like for the longest time, when I was working a part-time job, I would think, oh my goodness, it would be so great to have a full-time job, right? And then God provided a full-time job for me as a teacher. And then I was like, wow, it'd be really great if I could um, move into administration and become an administrator. And several years later, I was working as an administrator, right? And then I was like, okay, wow, as an administrator, it would be really great if, all these ideas that I have could be implemented. And so what's happening is like I want something, and even when I get it, it's not like I'm like, oh, this is so great. I got this thing
Yeah.
that I wanted.
Hmm.
There's something else that I find that I'm now pursuing instead afterwards. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just
Yeah.
at the foundational level, like what is that thing that is going to provide like complete and total satisfaction, like soul satisfaction at the deepest level. And that's,
Hmm.
I think, where it comes back to who God created us to be, right? And this is where also I think our beliefs matter because they're going to affect how we make daily choices. And what I mean by that is this: if you believe that your life is random, right? That there is no God, that we're just random cosmic accidents, right? Then really whatever purpose you might be looking for in your own life, like you're gonna have to come up with that,
Right.
or you're gonna have to get that from someone else, right? Something's gonna either you're gonna create it for yourself or you're gonna have to get it from someone else, right? And but I think maybe that doesn't satisfy us at the deepest level because like we know I made this thing up, right? Or it's like, or if I'm getting this from this external source, then maybe we feel like we're being defined by whatever this external source is.
Right.
But if I believe that no, my life is not an accident, that God actually, Psalm 139 talks about how God, He knew us even before we were born, right? Because
Mm.
He's eternal and He created us intentionally, He created us directly. He knows the details of every single one of our lives. Again, completely different perspective from which to look at your daily choices. And I think this is where, when we have that kind of perspective, that does allow us to tap into the things that we're passionate about, the things that we are gifted in, the things that we can spend hours doing, and it's not a chore at all, it's rather a joy,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so, speaking to you, you're in college currently, such an important time, right, where you're making all these decisions about
Right.
what am I going to pursue, after college and all these things, and I think yeah, one of the best advices that I got from one of my college professors in terms of career is to pursue, something. If you can find the intersection of something that you're good at, something that there's a demand for, and something that's going to pay enough for your daily needs,
Yeah.
look for something that fits inside those
Hmm.
criteria in terms of like a professional pursuit, perhaps, because um, like it or not, we're going to spend a lot of our waking time as adults working and providing
Right.
for ourselves and
Hmm.
potentially for our families as well. It'll make a huge difference if you're able to work um, in a field or in a job that you're passionate about. And I am very grateful to say that that is the case for me in terms of teaching because I love
Hmm.
music and I get to teach music. I
Yeah.
love learning and teaching, and it's a joy for me to be able to invest in the next generation of students that way.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you perfectly kind of dove us into like the right topic, which is career, because I wanted to get into that because, I guess for at least coming from me, or to many other, 18-year-olds out there who are kind of deciding, what career do I want? I'm interested to hear about your story about how you got into music. Like, did your parents support you, or did you kind of know already that you wanted to do music?
Yeah, that is an interesting question because I started playing piano when I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
And at that time, we didn't have a piano at our house. We just had this electronic keyboard, and it was like a half-size
Mhm.
keyboard. And I would come home from Sunday school and start playing the songs from Sunday school on that keyboard. And that was how my mom actually started wondering, how maybe music is his thing. And so I, took lessons growing up. And I was one of those kids that I loved to play, but I hated to practice. And so my mom had to make me like literally make me sit down in front of the piano and do my scales, do my arpeggios, and do all that. Side note, my wife, as a kid, when she was practicing violin, she loved practicing. Her mom actually had to tell her to stop practicing and like play
Wow.
outside and do stuff. So it's interesting how she and I are different in
Yeah.
that way. But um, it wasn't until I was a junior in high school that I discovered that I love piano. And that came about when I started playing some Chopin etudes. I remember the piece I first fell in love with was the Revolutionary Etude, Opus 10, number
Yeah, yeah.
12. And that just opened up a whole new world of a new category of pieces for me, learning ballades and getting to Rachmaninoff and all that. And so I made the decision in 11th grade to pursue music
Hmm.
as my major in college. My other choice that I was considering was neuroscience
Oh,
because I was also fascinated with the brain and how the brain works and
yeah.
how out of uh, I'm still fascinated in the brain and how it works and how there's so much we still don't know about the brain
Hmm.
and just the whole mind brain interaction and how that all fits together and all that. It's still fascinating stuff for me today. But all this to say that um, for me, as I settled on majoring in music, um, I love music, but I don't necessarily love performing, actually. I would much rather watch other people perform than
Hmm.
perform myself. And so I knew that within music, I wasn't going for a performance career or anything like that. What I wanted to do was to teach at a university or a college and be a professor. Um, and that was kind of my goal. And this is where sometimes God just interrupts our lives, and we make our plans, but sometimes God's like, nope, you're going to go in a
Yeah,
different
yeah,
direction.
yeah,
And that's where then I found myself instead of after finishing my master's degree, going on to get a PhD. I was thinking of studying musicology or something like that. Um, I found myself teaching at a K-12 school, Valley Christian Schools, which is where ultimately our paths crossed.
yeah.
But all this to say that I think in terms of choosing, like for me, my path in choosing a career, um, I don't regret studying music. I
Hmm.
will say that pursuing a career in the arts does have its challenges, especially
Right.
if your main source of income is gigs and getting performances. That can be kind of tough, right? I mean, you can have some good seasons with lots of concerts or shows or things like that, and you can have pretty dry seasons where you're living off of cup ramen. But if you love it enough, I would say, if you love it enough and you're willing to work hard, you're willing to be patient, you're willing to put yourself out there, introduce yourself to people, and build your professional network, um, I think you'll make it. I think you'll make it. And I think with that is the thing that I was referring to from my professor that I learned was the three-legged stool. And what he
Yeah,
told me about that was um, there's wisdom in having more than just one skill set as a
right.
musician. If you're a musician and you're like, oh, I can play these pieces really well, but that's all you can do, that's going to limit the number of opportunities that you may be that you might make yourself eligible for. As opposed to if you can say, you know what, okay, I'm a performer, but I also teach and I also arrange music. Or you can say I'm a performer, but I also produce my own music, and I also I don't know, run my own business where I connect artists with different opportunity, performance opportunities or whatever. But all this to say, if you can have enough of a diverse skill set within music or within the arts, that's going to really allow you to be more marketable. And it's not going to hurt, right? It's gonna help you out in terms of opening up more opportunities.
Yeah, that's some like great advice. I think it not only applies to music, but any other creative field as well,
Hmm.
with what you just said with that analogy. Yeah, I guess going on the topic of teaching, because you're clearly very passionate about it. Like from the classes I've attended, you
Hmm.
clearly love the subjects. And I wanted to ask, what makes a good teacher?
Oh man. As a teacher, this is something that I aspire to be, hopefully.
Hmm.
I think when I think about what I'm looking for in a good teacher, because I'm still a student too in terms of my doctorate program,
Hmm.
I think I would look for someone who knows their stuff, right? Who knows what they're talking about. Um, Someone who is approachable, someone that I feel like I can talk to them that they're not just this figure in the front of the room that is inaccessible to me as a student. Um, and then I think with that, I would just want to um, I would want them to care about who I was as a person and not just as a student. I think
Mm-hmm.
for me, those are kind of the things that I would look at. Just expertise, are they qualified? Do they know what they're talking about? Are they accessible? And then how do they view me, right? Am I just like a person on their attendance sheet, or
Mm-hmm.
do they recognize that um, I'm a person with my own history, with my own goals, with my own interests and desires, and hopefully they're interested in connecting with me at that level as well. And I know I don't do those things perfectly myself, but I hope that I'm able to, with the students that I do interact with, let them know that. And I do try to say this occasionally in class too, in terms of we all know that grades are important. I'm a teacher, right? And so I know grades
Yeah.
are important,
Mm-hmm.
but I try to remind my students that there are things that are more important than grades as well. All right, and what are some of those things? One is your health, for example, right? If you're sacrificing
Right.
your health to get good grades, long run, it's not worth it. Another thing that's more important, relationships, right? If you're so focused on academics or whatever it is that you're ignoring your friends, you're ignoring your family, it's not worth it either in the long run. Another thing that's more important than grades is your character, right? And this is where cheating might get you ahead
Yeah.
in the short term, but long term, and like, is that really who you want to be? Is a person who just is deceptive and can't be trusted? I don't think so. And yet sometimes, we might lose sight of certain things and maybe sacrifice our relationships with people, or you know what? I can run on 2 hours of sleep at night, right? It's like, no, you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to take care of yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
want to be healthy, right? And so, yeah, and again, a lot of what we've been talking about today is actually perspective, right? Whether it's about spiritual things or career or school, whatever
Yeah.
it is so important to have the proper healthy perspective for whatever it is that we're trying to do, including grades, right, and career, where it's like, yeah, we want to put our best foot forward. We want to do the best that we can in school and learning and pursuing a major and a career, um, all the while keeping a healthy and proper perspective of the proper place of that in our lives, where it doesn't end up taking over everything else and throwing everything else out of balance.
Yeah, I love like the principles that you speak of, you know, and I feel like, teaching is such a great way to connect with other people. And I'm curious to see, like how has that, that practice of connecting with other people manifested in other areas of your life?
Yeah, it's really interesting, like kind of thinking about that from the perspective of being a teacher, because
Yeah.
when I was in my master's program and doing kind of some student teaching, I was maybe 23, 24. And so when I was working with high school students who were seniors, really there were only 6 years of difference in my age and the student's age,
Mm,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
And I'm now 31. And so with this year's graduating class of 2024, if these current high school seniors are 18,
Hmm.
that's like 13 years difference now between myself
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the seniors, and so that number is growing, right? And then when I work with junior high students, that's an even bigger
Right.
age difference now, um and I'm still in my early 30s, and there are teachers that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and it's just this thing where we've talked about time earlier as well. So where I'm going with this is to respond to your question in terms of relating with people. I think sometimes we can get too caught up with age differences,
Mm,
where it's like we spend, and it makes sense, we spend most of our time maybe with people who are a similar age to
yeah.
us, a similar stage in life, and that makes sense. Um, but at the end of the day, like, people are people, right? And I
Hmm.
think something I've learned as a teacher is, as I get older and the age gap between myself and my students increases, the fundamental human needs are the same.
Right.
We all want connection. We all want trust. We all want to know that whoever it is we're dealing with is going to respect us, is
Hmm.
going to be kind to us. is going to um, put our needs above theirs, right? That's what love is putting someone else's needs above your own needs, and really caring for them in that way. These are all universal human needs, and desires. And so I think that's something that I've really appreciated learning as a teacher is that whether I'm interacting with a junior high student, high school student, a parent, a colleague, whoever it is, um, at the end of the day, we're all people, made in the image of God. We all want the same things. We want
Hmm.
peace. We want harmony. We want joy. We want trust. And I think if you can tap into those deeper needs and desires, that's going to create a healthy foundation for then relating to another person, in the context of school or work or really anything else that you're interacting with.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Yeah, I guess wrapping up with, some rapid fire questions, if you don't mind
Sure.
answering. Yeah,
Yeah.
so what were some like one or two verses that has been like a prominent that has played a prominent role in your life and has shaped who you
Wow.
become?
Yeah, I think two that come to mind. First is Philippians 1:21, I think it is.
Mm,
And this is the Apostle Paul, and he says, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." I think there's that, to me, that verse is so profound. To live is Christ, to die is gain. And
yeah.
and I think as I think about that, to live is Christ, what that reminds me is Jesus gave his life for me, so I want to give my life for him. And then to die is gain. When it's time for me to leave this earth, what awaits me on the other side is infinitely better than what I'll be leaving behind here.
Mhm.
Um, it's gain because heaven is gain. Heaven is where God is. Heaven is perfect.
Mhm.
And so, just in a nutshell, that verse brings me so much
Yeah.
clarity and encouragement. To live is Christ, to die is gain. And then another verse that's been really foundational for me is Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you. And based on the context of that passage, these things that Jesus is referring to is basically our daily needs. I think we spend a lot of our time and energy pursuing all these different things, right? That we talked
Yeah.
about, um, food, clothing, all these things that we need. And Jesus is saying first things first, basically. If you align your life around what truly matters, which is knowing God and pursuing Him, trust that He's going to give you everything that you need because He already
Mhm.
knows what you need, right?
Yeah.
And He cares for you, and so He's going to provide these things for you. So that has been a really, really encouraging verse for me as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Two great verses. Yeah, I want to ask with one last question. I usually close off with this question for every podcast episode. If you were to give a single message back to your 18-year-old self, what would that one message be?
Mm. Um, I think it's a quote that I think I may have shared this with you previously too, but
Hmm.
I also got this. I heard this first from one of my high school teachers.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I forget, the person that originally said this, but the quote goes, "Only one life, it will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last."
Hmm.
I love that as well.
Yeah.
Only one life, it'll soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And
Oh.
again, just thinking about what truly matters, right, in terms of the
Hmm.
temporal and the eternal.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks for making it this far in the podcast. And thank you, Mr. Tomo. I loved hearing your wisdom and your thoughts and your perspective about life and you know our whole existence. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's been a joy for me to talk with you. Hopefully, I wasn't rambling too much during this
No,
time,
of
but
course not. Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
very grateful
Yeah.
for this opportunity. Thank you.
All right. So we'll see you in the next. All right. Peace.